just heard the presentation, so I have to refrain from commenting because they were not made available earlier to me, but I will give the South Centre's perspective on the crisis and what needs to be done at the level of developing countries and what needs to be done at the international cooperation level. This crisis is extraordinarily sudden and serious. As we know, it has its roots in the developed countries. The developing countries are not responsible, but we are severely affected and in ways that are worse than the developed countries, also because the developing countries don't have the resources or the means to counter the effects. Due to the lag time of transmitting the crisis from developed to developing countries, the developing countries have only now begun to feel the effects in the last few months. And as the crisis in the Western world is expected to last at least for another 1 or 2 years, and then after that, there will be slow or stagnant growth. It will be quite a long time before we have a full recovery. So we are looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 years. And we are only maybe at month number 5 or 6. So can you imagine what the situation will be next year? And this is why the economists, but also the political leaders in developing countries are getting very worried. You may have seen the newspaper report when the Ethiopian Prime Minister visited Gordon Brown as part of the preparations for the G20. He warned that there would be political chaos in Africa. He also said that in developed countries such as Britain, the problem you are facing is unemployment. But in Africa, the recession means that people who were getting some food would no longer get it. Instead of being unemployed, they would die. And this is the life and death problem that we are now going to face. The paper that I have given out talks of the crisis hitting the developing world in 4 levels. There are 2 main transmission routes, the first being trade, the second being finance. In the trade route, firstly, a fall in manufacturing exports, hitting especially the middle-income developing countries like China or ASEAN, where exports have fallen by 30 to 50% very suddenly, 50%. Then there is the fall in commodity prices that we have heard about, which is very tragic because it was the high commodity prices in the last 4 to 5 years that mainly fueled the rapid growth in Africa of 6 to 7% a year. And now the prices are falling. It fell by, on average, about 40% on March 17 as compared to 1 year ago. Then we have the fall in earnings from services such as tourism. In the Caribbean, it is estimated that tourist arrivals may fall by 1/3 this season, and a fall in the remittances of migrant workers' income. The World Bank estimate is a 6% drop in 2009. The second big transmission route is finance, and here the developing world is hit in many ways. Firstly, there is a rapid decline of bank loans to developing countries, as we have heard just now. And this is serious because there is a World Bank estimate that private companies in the developing countries are facing the maturity of their loans worth $1 trillion this year. And when the loans mature, you normally roll over the loans. And if the loans are not able to be rolled over, then we have a massive problem of a new external debt crisis. But this is not all. I think the total debt of developing countries that that is maturing and that has to be rolled over is about $3 trillion, from what I just read in the World Bank paper. 1 trillion is private sector loans. So this is the foundation for a possible new debt crisis for many countries. The second finance problem, of course, is the flow of funds that came in and has suddenly gone out very rapidly and very suddenly. This is the portfolio funds going into stock markets and bond markets in the developing world. And we have heard that the net capital flows to developing countries was 930 billion 2 years ago, fell to 470 billion last year, will fall to 165 billion in 2009. So this is what organizations like UNCTAD was warning about. In the good years, you have massive inflows of funds, and then in the bad years, you have a sudden and very massive outflow, causing havoc in its wake. Because in financial deregulation, both in the Western world as well as internationally, promoted by so many agencies, in other words, that countries must have an open capital account, meaning you do not regulate the inflow and outflow of funds. Then the big inflows in 1 year can become a massive outflow in the next year, causing tremendous instability as well as recession. And now we are seeing it in a way that, that has never been seen before. You know, before a tsunami comes, the sea rolls. I know, we faced a tsunami in Malaysia 2-3 years ago. The ocean suddenly dries up and the waves go out. So the children go to collect fish and so on. And then the waves come in a big blow. And this is a tsunami that we are seeing in terms of capital flows. As the squeezing of trade financing, which is about $25 billion worth of trade financing that has vanished, causes or magnifies the problem of falling trade. So these two mechanisms, the trade mechanism and the finance mechanism, together combined, lead to stresses on the overall balance of payments of many developing countries, including a fall in their foreign reserves, a depreciation in the local currency in some countries, and a threat to many developing countries' ability to service their external debt, which is coming. I think UNCTAD is doing a paper actually on dangers to developing countries of a new external debt problem. We've just had multilateral debt relief for 18 to 40 countries. These countries have been liberated from multilateral debt, many of them African countries. And it is unfortunate that many countries may now be lining up for a new generation of debt crisis. There are already 10 countries that have gone to the IMF for emergency loans, and many others may be lining up in future. That is the third problem. The fourth problem is the stress on the real economy. We are now seeing figures of a decline in industrial output, in GNP, a reversal of poverty eradication, of social development and so on that we got from unemployment that we listened this morning from the experts from the ILO and so on. So what can the developing countries do? Ideally, what we should do is list down all these possible problems that a country can face. Each country will be facing different problems. For example, in China, the problem is falling exports of manufactured goods. In Africa, the major problem is fall in export earnings from commodities. Each country is affected in a different way.